Not too long after it's begun, Alberta ends its Alberta is Calling campaign, but not for the reasons you might think they did. Let's get into it.
Oh, yeah!
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to The Fringe. Again, I hope you guys had a wonderful New Year's. I hope you had a great holiday, as most of us tried to get through it as best as we could, given the circumstances that we're in this country. Alberta, on the brink of canceling or ending its Alberta is Calling campaign, this once mighty campaign to influence people to come to the province. As times are getting tougher, it's harder for provinces to open their doors, so to speak. And we've talked about immigration on this channel multiple times, whether it's from out of the country, from within the country, people moving from province to province, people coming over illegally, people coming over looking for amnesty. We have many problems in this country, with Alberta, again, being one of the provinces that, as we're seeing the mass growth, I guess you could say, in major capital cities of tent cities, people losing their homes. Well, Alberta has fallen on the sword to once again say that Alberta is no longer calling. Now, this was an ad campaign that Danielle Smith and the United Conservative Party put out months ago to promote people to move to Alberta. They wanted tradespeople, they wanted doctors, they wanted people that really wanted to get a better life. And I've said multiple times as I live in Alberta, it's certainly not to toot our own horns, but Alberta, part of the reason I've never left Alberta, aside from growing up in Winnipeg as a kid, but I'll never go back. And part of the reason I don't go back is because Alberta, even in darkest days, has always yielded opportunity. Cities like Calgary are beautiful, beautiful cities that no matter which direction you go, north, east, west, or south, 2 hours in each direction puts you in a different part of the world. If you go 2 hours west, you're in the mountains. 2 hours south, you're in the United States. 2 hours east, you're in the prairies. 2 hours north, you're pretty much West Edmonton Mall area, and there's more attractions to see. It's the people of this province are good people, and they're people that don't mind getting their hands dirty and working hard when the rewards are reaped for said hard work. Now, Danielle Smith again canceling the campaign because Alberta has now gained another 17,000 people from other provinces in 3 months. A lot of those 17,000, though, are migrants. Migrants that, well, quite frankly, they're not wanting to do anything. As we talk about things like universal basic income and the dangers of universal basic income, I mean, these are people that aren't interested, for the most part, of getting their hands dirty, and a lot of them are coming from left-leaning provinces, which, of course, puts Alberta's political spectrum at risk when you look at what they called the Conservative dynasty that used to go on in Alberta. The Conservative Party was in power in Alberta from the 1970s pretty much all the way up until 2011, or 2012, sorry, when Rachel Notley, the sheriff of Nottingham, took over Alberta with the NDP party. That was disastrous for Alberta. But again, you have a lot of left-leaning medical workers, teachers, union workers that, if you've seen an Alberta election, the majority of them are within Lethbridge and Edmonton that vote typically for the NDP. And even Danielle Smith's reign over Alberta was a very minor win in the last election. It was an election that could have gone either way. So it's scary to think that when we're taking in other people that share a lot of these views, that really just want Alberta to get rid of its oil industry, to stop fracking, to go green, so to speak, to cut programs, to basically be a have-not province. Danielle Smith has shut the doors. People who've moved into Canada over the summer overwhelmingly chose Alberta again as their destination, according to new estimates released by Statistics Canada. Meanwhile, the provincial government says it stopped running its Alberta's Calling advertisements, which had encouraged Canadians to consider the province as a new home. Alberta gained 17,094 people on net from other provinces and territories from July through September. So in just 2.5 months, not even, We've seen 17,000 people come to Alberta. That continues a trend that started more than a year ago for Alberta. The province has now registered interprovincial migration gains of at least 10,000 people for 5 consecutive quarters. That's the first time that's happened since Statistics Canada started tracking this data in 1971. Now, what's important to measure with that, again, is when you look at the statistics of places like Roxham Road, and you see the illegal migrants that come over the border that are arrested. Well, they call it getting arrested, and they're put up in hotels on the taxpayer's dime. They claim asylum. They wait for their day in court, and most times they're given the right to stay in Canada. From my understanding, again, I could be wrong on that, but more times than not, it's my understanding that they're permitted to stay within Canada. They say that over 3 years, we probably see about the population of Calgary, which is about 1.7 million people, coming over those borders. Not just Roxham Road, but illegally into the country or seeking asylum. So in 3 years' time, we see the population of a major Alberta city come to Canada. Now, with Alberta taking in 10,000, 5 consecutive quarters, I mean, that speaks volumes that, again, the majority of the people that are coming aren't necessarily from other provinces, but they're asylum seekers. New Brunswick was the only other province with positive interprovincial migration numbers for the most recent quarter, with a very small gain of 21 people. A lot of people have told me New Brunswick is the place to move to if you want to have an affordable home. It's one of the last bastions in Canada where housing is somewhat reasonable in terms of its pricing. Every other province saw more people leaving than arriving from other parts of the country. Most of Alberta's population gains through interprovincial migration due to its exchanges with Ontario and British Columbia, Statistics Canada said in a release. Now, again, that's very kind of obvious. I mean, people can't afford to live in Ontario and British Columbia due to their high taxes and their poor management of funding. Alberta's continued gain stands in contrast to its neighbor to the west, the federal agency noted. British Columbia experienced 5 consecutive quarters of interprovincial migration losses for the first time since the first quarter of 2013, it said in a release. Again, you look at the 10 cities in British Columbia, especially places like Vancouver. Again, people there are paying PST, GST, HST. Rents are through the roof. Housing's through the roof in terms of cost. You basically have to sell both your kidneys and maybe a child to afford, along with your soul, I guess, to the devil in order to afford a home in places like Vancouver or around Vancouver. People just, they get to a point where it's, I can't live here anymore. Ontario saw the largest outmigration in terms of absolute numbers, with more than 5,900 people leaving than arriving, continuing a trend that began in the first quarter of 2020. Stats Canada noted that the outmigration of Ontario did slow, however, in the third quarter of 2023. Meanwhile, the Atlantic provinces observed a negligible or negative net interprovincial migration, which is a contrast to the trend seen in 2020 to 2022 during the pandemic. Well, of course, it's a contrast. People weren't moving during the pandemic when they recorded strong growth from population exchanges with other provinces and territories. This can be largely attributable to the recent decrease in numbers of migrants moving from Ontario to Atlantic provinces. Now we get into Alberta no longer calling. The province launched its campaign in August of 2022, boasting of bigger paychecks and smaller rent checks. March 2023, it rolled out a second round of the ad campaign, which was just before Danielle Smith's election. We have the most affordable housing in all of Canada, pretty much of any city, Brian Jean, Alberta's Minister of Jobs and Economic Development, said at the time, and said during the March rollout. So now people can, for instance, sell their home in Toronto or in Vancouver and buy 4 houses here in Alberta, live in one, and rent 3. Now, that is the stupidest statement I've ever heard in my life. Encouraging wealthy landowners, come to Alberta, buy a home, sell yours, live rent-free essentially, and gouge people coming here that are looking for the same opportunities. Real estate is not a sound investment. Anybody who says it is doesn't understand the real estate market. For many years, decades even in Calgary especially, people put all their faith in the home market, the housing market, and they don't realize that it's an up and down boom bust economy. People seem to think anytime they have equity in their homes that just means, hey, we have free money. And what they don't realize is that things are going to change, especially this year when we talk about that housing bubble. If you've watched Pierre Poilievre's Implosion documentary, things are about to collapse. Now, I don't think in Alberta we're going to see 50% collapses or anything drastic like the 2008 decline in the United States, but I do think you're probably going to see a 15 to 20% decline at some point in 2024. But again, guys like Brian Jean, which are the reason I'm glad he didn't get elected in Alberta. He's essentially Jason Kenney, or as I call him, Fat Stalin, number 2. Yeah, come on down here. Sell your house in Toronto where it's $1 million and come buy a couple in Alberta. Now, I'm not sure where in Alberta he's talking. Maybe Edmonton area, maybe, north of Edmonton. But I know in Calgary, you couldn't buy 3 homes with the cost of a house in Toronto or Vancouver. If you sold your home in Toronto for just over $1 million, you could afford to. You could afford, if you were just putting down a down payment, you could afford 3 houses. But you certainly couldn't afford to pay one off while buying another one and renting them out. The average house in Calgary right now sits at about $600,000. The last time I checked, now that was a few months ago, so bear with me if I'm wrong on those numbers. There's now 4.7 million people living in the province, according to Statistics Canada's latest estimates, which makes up a 4.3% increase in the past year. As Alberta's population has surged, so too has the cost of housing, particularly in Calgary. So there you go. So again, Danielle Smith's doing a good job, and that is attracting people who do want to come here, who want to escape some of the things that are going on in other parts of the world. Again, the inability to live, overtaxation, poor policy. During a telephone town hall last week of the upcoming provincial budget, many Albertans asked questions about inflation and the rapidly rising cost of housing. Finance Minister Nate Horner said that Alberta's calling campaign has been successful in its goals, but it is time to bring that to an end. We've since quit that campaign, Horner said in the town hall. We think Alberta called and many answered, but it has taken up a lot of the vacancies. The housing market is very tight. Now, one thing they're not mentioning in this article, and the one thing that I'm talking about and that I have been talking about during this entire blathering of this article, is immigration. Again, I've said 1,000,000 times over, I'm happy if people come to this country looking for better opportunities. I'm happy if people see Alberta as a place of prosperity, much like my family did in the 90s, and say, hey, we're gonna move there, we're gonna live there, we're gonna grow our family there. But those people have to be willing to get their hands dirty. Those people have to be willing to face the music that, hey, you got to have a job, and there has to be work that's at a reasonable rate for people if you're going to live here. People who also move here from more expensive cities have to stop outbidding each other and raising the cost of available housing, because of course, as Nate Horner suggested, that housing's running a little thin. This is what cranked up houses in the early 2000s in Calgary, was you had people moving from places like Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, where houses were 40% more expensive than Calgary. So they would sit outside in the driveway. Realtors would go from car to car taking bids. They would do bidding wars on houses because they had the money for it. So suddenly the housing price in Calgary almost doubled overnight, never really corrected itself from that. And if we run into one of those situations again, boy, things are going to get real nasty, especially in places like Calgary, where, again, people buy a home. They're basically called a millionaire nowadays. But as a homeowner in Calgary, I can say it's good, but it's also bad at the same time. But let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. Should Alberta still be calling? Should Alberta have stopped calling a long time ago? And what do you think this means for migration or people leaving provinces even in the future? Leave your comments down below. Make sure to do all the usual YouTube stuff. Do the subscribe, hit the bell for notifications if this video has earned your subscription at least. Anytime we talk about Justin Trudeau, anytime we talk about Canadian politics on this channel, which is more often than not because we're a Canadian politic channel, we get buried in the algorithm. We get silenced by Justin Trudeau and his thought police. So make sure to like, share, comment, subscribe, throw it out, do everything you can to help make sure this video reaches others, and join us this Sunday as live streams return here on the Weekly Wrap as we sit and talk about everything that's happened in the past week, everything coming up in the week ahead, and everything that you guys in my community want to talk about. I look forward to seeing you all there at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time on Sunday, and look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and have a great rest of your day. I'll catch you on the next one.